Spot these three strong signs he's serious about you. We're going to dive into this today. Well, I'm sure if you're a woman out there in the dating marketplace, you've certainly recognized men who are not serious about you, not capable, not ready for commitment. They show up oftentimes as flaky in the early stage of dating. It's kind of also referenced into he's just not that into you. His life is in chaos. He's incapable of actually diving into a relationship. He has issues from his childhood wounds and traumas, and it makes it radically difficult for him to be in a relationship. Maybe he's going through some financial struggles right now. Maybe has a contentious relationship with an ex, or maybe he's still hung up on an ex. You see, the reality is there are a lot more signs a person is incapable of being in a relationship versus being capable of a relationship. Let me repeat that. There's a lot more signs that a person may not be ready for a relationship, but we're going to dive into how you can tell he's serious about you. Now, what's interesting, I'm going to share a story. You may find this offensive, so please forgive me. This is not my story. This is a story of a client who worked with me a couple years ago. And she went through my boot camp where I teach you radical honesty, pre-qualifying your prospect, because the reality is if we can't determine if somebody is compatible within our lives, it's going to be rather difficult, because many of us have been adopted in believing that chemistry equals relationship success. And if you love each other, you can make magic fairy dust solve all of your difficulties and problems together. So I want to tell you a story about a client who reached out to me recently because she's now in a serious relationship and she wanted some particular advice. But when I asked her about this gentleman she's in relationship with, she told me a fascinating story. Now, I just want to give you some context. She worked with me over a year ago, and I hadn't spoken to her in about a year. But she had a new strategy for dating, which I thought was radically interesting. And she actually heard it from a girlfriend of hers, and she decided to do this herself. So she told men right on the very first date. Again, this is going to shock you. Many of you are going to be offended by it, but please bear with me for a second. But she said, if there was mutual chemistry between myself and this other person, in other words, there was palpable chemistry, there was a strong attraction for one another on a first date, she would tell men, look, I'm very interested in you, and I'd even want you to know that I will sleep with you early if you pass my test. If you pass my test. Now, she shared that with 5 different men. This is the story that she told me. I thought this was fascinating, but on that first meeting, she said, I'll have sex with you if you pass my test. Would you be willing to take my test? And all the men eager, decided, no problem. I will take your test. And what she did was she practiced this radical honesty practice that I have in my private coaching. I call it radical honesty, pre-qualifying your prospect. It is designing questions based on your personality and your needs, wants, and desires to decide if you're compatible with another person. We already mentioned before, someone just not that into you, breadcrumbing, that sort of thing. You don't recognize that right off the bat. Is someone's life in chaos? You may not recognize that right off the bat. Or if they have unhealed childhood wounds and traumas, you may not recognize that off the bat unless you ask more probing questions. I'll give you an example from my own personal life. This was several months back. I interacted with a woman on a dating site, and she emailed me first. And one of the first questions I asked her within the first 5 minutes of our first phone call, and by the way, she emailed me first. So I'm just sharing with you, she initiated, okay? And I asked her, I said, when did your last relationship end? And she said, last night. And I go, what? She goes, yeah, I was in a 2-year relationship, but it'd been over for a year. She literally was back out in the dating marketplace. Now, I knew right in that very moment, I did not want to jump on her bandwagon of being one of her transition relationships or just a good time. I've learned through my own experiences that it takes time to unravel the tapestry of a past relationship. So I asked a serious question right within the first 5 minutes of a conversation. See, ladies, What's interesting about this client, she said, look, I want to ask all of my deep questions just to see if we're a fit for compatibility. And what's interesting is what she'd say is, if you pass my test, we'll get together the next night. And all these men would be eager, answering all the questions. And then she was given 24 hours to ruminate on it. And what happened is, of the 5 men she did this with, the first 4 men didn't pass her test. See, she recognized by asking some probing questions, by recognizing that dating is really a vetting process to determine compatibility. I know we hyper focus on romance, we hyper focus on entertainment, we hyper focus on having a good time with one another, and doing this for a period of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, just having a good time before you get into the nitty-gritty of who a person is. And the challenge with that methodology, and I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with it, you're each entitled to do your own. But what happens is you might get attached to a wrong person, which you could have determined maybe earlier on if there was some compatibility between the two of you. And most importantly, in particularly, is this person emotionally mature enough to be in a significant relationship? Let me repeat that. Are they emotionally mature enough to be in a relationship? Folks, whether we like it or not, we have to become detectives. Whether we like it or not, we have to become pseudo-therapists. I know this is, like going to a book and trying to read the last page to get the answers, but I'm here to say, and by the way, how many people actually do that? They sometimes read books in chaotic ways. But my point in bringing that up is, we don't have the time to waste with people who are incapable. And let me just stress this component for everybody, whether you're a man or woman. Just because you desire a relationship doesn't mean you're capable of a relationship. Just because you desire companionship, connection, and physical intimacy doesn't mean you're capable of a relationship. And what I've determined is, yes, you need desire for a serious relationship. Well, let me reframe that. First, we have to identify what type of relationship you seek. And by the way, I'll get to those 3 strong signs in a minute, but you got to stick with me here for a moment. See, these days, casual relationships actually outnumber serious relationships. In fact, hooking up, friends with benefits, and situationships probably even outnumber casual relationships. The way I've observed relationships these days is, there are far less serious relationships because casual relationships, meaning, and a casual relationship might have monogamy, it might have exclusivity built in, but there's no real teamwork building in this relationship. There's no real plan to actually grow this beyond the experience of companionship, connection, and sex. And this is where having these radically honest conversations about another person is important if you want a serious relationship. Look, I get it. It's not easy out there. I know there's so many rules, so many different things, so much advice out there. I'm just merely suggesting that you take this in and decide if this actually is something that you can incorporate in your life. And midlife dating requires, going deeper, because the reality is most people come to the table. Maybe they have a contentious relationship with an ex. Maybe they're still pining over an ex. Maybe they're going through some sort of financial challenge in their life. Maybe they have some health concerns. And for those of us in midlife, health is another huge factor to kind of contemplate when we're evaluating whether or not this person makes sense. So let me tell you the balance of this story. So she did this with 5 different men, and it turns out the first 4 men didn't pass the test, but the 5th man was eager, excited to answer those questions. In fact, he went on to ask her the exact same questions. They began delving into each other's lives, and they actually waited for about the 6th date before they were physically intimate, even though she offered it up very early on. And why she offered it up, and this was her logic behind this thing, is she goes, I wanted to take sex off the table from the perspective of chasing, because we all know men love the hunt and men love the chase. And certainly this hunt that men are on is a fully committed relationship. not. Men are on the hunt for physical intimacy. So when she took it off the table with him, or at least let me reframe it, when she didn't made it easy for him to get it, it allowed her to focus on whether or not he's the right person for her. And again, what ended up happening is they ended up having about 6 really fantastic get-togethers, dates. They asked each other about what their dreams were, their desires. They did all those 36 questions, but she went on to be more granular based on her personality, this radical honesty. And it turns out she's in what looks like a pretty serious relationship. And I'm very happy for her. Now, mind you, it's only about 5 months in. I would say the first 90 days is the kind of make breaker period within a relationship. These are when the first 90 days is when you start to see these 3 strong signs he's serious about you. And it basically carries over into the next 90 days. So roughly just before the 3-month mark and before the 6-month mark, you should be able to see these 3 strong signs that he's serious about you. And I know this might seem rather obvious, but I think it's important to reiterate this. Okay, number 1, he makes you a priority. You know, it's interesting. I had a client come to me with a new relationship, and she said something very interesting that I think is worth exploring here. Please let me take a, oh, by the way, my coffee mug says swear a little, you'll feel better. These are my Sunday videos where I don't swear. But she was talking about this gentleman that on their first date, he was overemphasizing how busy his life was, and he had a lot of things on his plate. And she was kind of second guessing if this person is even capable of a relationship. Remember, I told you earlier about people in relationship. First, their desire for a relationship, and I'm talking about a serious relationship, their capacity or capability and their vision for a serious relationship has to outweigh their fears and their past hurts. Their fears and their past hurts. So if their desire, capacity, and vision exceeds that, then they might be a good candidate for a relationship. That's why we have to pre-qualify these folks, okay? So I want to come back to priority with this gentleman. So it was interesting is she thought after the first date that he wasn't going to be very available, and it turned out he was going to be busy for about a week. But what shocked her was when he came back from a short-lived business trip, he reached out to her and said, I'd like to take you out again. This was on a Saturday. He asked her for a Wednesday. And then he went on to say, hey, look, I've cleared my calendar. I actually want to get to know you. I recognize that my life, this is his words, my life needs balance. And because I was single for so long, I kind of overemphasized a lot of other things in my life, but I really like you. I'd really like to get to know you. And I've actually went ahead and taken things off my plate because I wanted to create enough time for us to get to know one another. And what's fascinating is that they met on that Wednesday night, and it seems like they've been attached to the hip ever since. They actually live rather close to one another. I can currently relate to that. So much easier to date and get to know someone who lives in your backyard. Just a little side note, but that's not always the case here. But again, he actually made her a priority, and this was literally after the first date or meeting that they had. Okay, so he makes you a priority. I think that's rather obvious. Number 2, he actively tries to help you in your life. He actively tries to help you in your life. I remember once I was working with a client who had just been dating a man. It was about 6 weeks in. They had physical intimacy. They were starting to do things together. She even introduced him to her children. And it turns out she had to move. It was kind of something happened with her landlord, and she had to immediately move. And he said, I promise to help you. I promise to help you. I promise to help you. And then when the day came where she needed help on the moving day, he was nowhere to be found. You see, a man who is strongly into you, he would have been there. He would have been there to help move, and might not have been that overly sophisticated, but in this particular case, this gentleman made that reference and he didn't follow through. A guy who's serious about you, he's actively trying to help you in your life. I'm going to give you another example. This is a little bit sad, but I think it certainly illustrates this. Shortly after my son passed away, I connected with a woman who also had lost a child, and she was telling me the story about when she found out about the day her son passed away. And she was actually coming home from a date. I think she'd been dating a man for maybe 6 or 7 times. It's a little over a month. And he was there when she heard the news. You know what he did? He stepped into her life. He didn't run away. When I say run away, this was a very traumatic experience she was going through. And he didn't run away. He leaned in. He actively began trying to help her. He spoke to the police that evening just because she was in such shock. He actively tried to help her in her life. And by the way, they subsequently got engaged a year later, and they're now married. When a man is serious about you, he actively wants to try to help you in your life. He wants to give advice. He wants to be a person that if you're moving, he's there for you. If something's going on in your life, he operates like a teammate. See, that's one of the signs that someone's serious about you is they operate as a team in your life. And that leads into our third strong sign he's serious about you. He integrates you into his life and also wants to integrate in your life. That's just part of that teamwork, that melding. He introduces you to his friends, his family. He wants to meet your friends and family. Now, this isn't always a guarantee. A lot of people can be impetuous and do this sort of thing. But a man who's genuinely serious about you, and he actually knows, most men know by the 5th or 6th date whether this is someone I could see in my life or it's just a short-lived experience. And if it's a short-lived experience, they're oftentimes hyper-focused on the sex. By the way, it's interesting that client decided to take the sex off the table, or at least, no, excuse me, by putting the sex on the table, but she ended up not having sex right away with this gentleman he's with. See, when we actually can get to know each other from a heart-centered place, taking out the physical, taking out the romance, taking out the entertainment with one another, and actually get to know one another at a heart-centered level, you'll start to see men who want to make you a priority. They want to actively help you in your life. They want to integrate into your life and his life as well. See, I think it's time to overhaul our current dating structure and start operating from a place. Hey, listen, it's not very sexy, but asking questions is how you get to know one another. Asking questions is how you build intimacy with one another. To find out about another person, we have to ask questions. And yes, not everyone is going to be honest. I get that. But you know what? It's better to ask and see how they respond versus not asking at all. Is this sinking in? Is this resonating with you? Please let me know if it is. Post a comment below. I do my best to read them all in the first 24 hours. As always, if you find value in my videos, please hit that like button. Please share this video. Please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you can be notified of new videos. And if you want to connect with me directly, there's links below to schedule a discovery call. There's a link to join my group called Midlife Love Mastery. There's a link to follow me on Instagram and to get all the books I recommend and my dating vows, which is crucial before you're physically intimate with someone. And by the way, that client said she asked the dating vows. And like I said, she's now in a serious relationship. All right, I'm going to wrap up this video as I always do. First off, give myself a big, gigantic Jonathon bear hug of self-love. I'm going to reach into the camera and give you a hug of love if that's okay. I'm asking you to turn to someone, a pet, a teddy bear, a pillow, and give it or them a hug of love because hugs are a great source of love. And let's face it, we could all use more love in our lives. Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.